Good evening, boys and girls. It's time for reading from the Jesus Storybook Bible once again. Tonight, our readings are about the prophet Isaiah and Daniel in the lion's den. Do you know what your name means? Well, there was once a man called Isaiah, and his name meant God to the rescue. That might sound like a bit of a funny name to you, but it was just the right name for Isaiah, because God had a special job for Isaiah. You see, Isaiah's job was to listen to God and then tell people what he heard. Now, God let Isaiah know a secret. God was going to mend his broken world. He showed Isaiah his secret rescue plan, Operation No More Tears. This is the message God gave Isaiah. It was like a letter that God wrote to his children. Dear little flock, you're all wandering away from me, like sheep in an open field. You've always been running away from me, and now you're lost. You can't find your way back. But I can't stop loving you. I will come to find you. So I am sending you a shepherd to look after you and love you, to carry you home to me. You've been stumbling around like people in a dark room, but into the darkness a bright light will shine. It will chase away the shadows like sunshine. A little baby will be born, a royal son. His mommy will be a young girl who doesn't have a husband. His name will be Emmanuel, which means God has come to live with us. He is one of King David's children's children's children, the Prince of Peace. Yes, someone is going to come and rescue you, but he won't be who anyone expects. He will be a king, but he won't live in a palace, and he won't have lots of money. He will be poor. He will be a servant. But this king will heal the whole world. He will be a hero. He will fight for his people and rescue them from their enemies, but he won't have big armies. He won't fight with swords. He will make the blind see. He will make the lame leap like a deer. He will make everything the way it was always meant to be. But people will hate him. They won't listen to him. He'll be like a lamb. He will suffer and die. It's the secret rescue plan we made from before the beginning of the world. It's the only way to get you back. But he won't stay dead. I will make him alive again. And one day when he comes back to rule forever, the mountains and trees will dance and sing for joy. The earth will shout out loud. His fame will fill the whole earth as the waters cover the sea. Everything sad will come untrue. Even death is going to die. And he will wipe away every tear from every eye. Yes, the rescuer will come. Look for him. Watch for him. Wait for him. He will come, I promise. And poor Isaiah. He read God's letter over and over to God's people, but no one listened to him at all, ever. They didn't want to hear God's promise. They didn't believe it. Did it sound maybe too good to be true? A story that ends happily ever after? Well, it does sound like a fairy tale, doesn't it? And as anyone will quickly tell you, fairy tales aren't true. Or are they? Things were not looking good for God's people. They had been captured and taken far from home, and now they were slaves of the king of Babylon. But God had not left his people. He was with them, and he was looking after them. Daniel loved God and obeyed him. Now, God made Daniel able to understand lots of things, so it wasn't long before the king of Babylon noticed him. King Darius liked how clever Daniel was, so he made Daniel his most important helper of all, and he put him in charge of lots of other helpers. But the other helpers didn't like this. They wanted the king to like them best. They wanted to get rid of Daniel. So they spied on Daniel. They tried to find things wrong with Daniel, things they could tell the king, things they could... But there weren't any things. None. You couldn't find anything at all. Except there was just the one thing. Every day, 3 times a day, without fail, no matter what, Daniel went to his room, closed the door, and prayed. They smiled to themselves. "Let's get the king to make a law. No one is allowed to pray to anyone, except to the king. Daniel won't obey the law, and he'll be punished." They were pleased with themselves for being so clever, and hurried off to tell the king. The king liked their idea. He didn't know they were tricking him, so he made it into a law. "Everyone must pray, only to me. If you don't, the lions will have you for their dinner." Daniel heard this. He knew it was wrong to pray to anyone except God. He had to do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant he would die. So Daniel went to his room, closed the door, and prayed. That's just what the bad men knew Daniel would do. They skipped straight off to tell the king. "Oh, your most glittering highness, your law says, does it not, that everyone must pray to you alone, sire?" "Yes," said the king. "Oh, magisterial brightness, then correct us if we're wrong, but it would seem that Daniel is praying to God, not to you." The king was sad. He'd been tricked. He didn't want to hurt Daniel, but he couldn't change his law, and so he let the soldiers throw Daniel to the lions. "May your God, who you love so much, rescue you," the king said. The king went back to his palace, but he didn't sleep that night, not a wink. He tossed and turned until finally, at the first glimmer of dawn, he leapt out of bed and ran straight to the den. "Daniel," he cried, "has your God rescued you?" "Yes," Daniel shouted. "God sent an angel to close the lions' mouths." And there, resting his head on Daniel's lap, was the biggest lion, purring like a little kitten. The king brought Daniel out of the den. "Look," he said, "Daniel doesn't even have a scratch." The king made a new law. "Daniel's God is the true God, the God who rescues. Pray to him instead." God would keep on rescuing his people, and the time was coming when God would send another brave hero, like Daniel, who would love God and would do what God said, whatever it cost him, even if it meant he would die. And together they would pull off the greatest rescue the world has ever known.